Well, hello again. My name is Alister McGrath, and let me welcome you to the third very informal homemade posting about some issues raised by the new atheism. And in my last posting, I talked a little bit about how Christians believe that there is more to reality than pure human reason discloses. Faith is not about contradicting reason, rather it's about transcending it and escaping from its limitations. And one of the points I want to emphasize is that faith challenges the rationalist dogma of the finality of reason and demands to be allowed to explore deeper and better worlds. Now, the new atheism makes rationality one of its core defining characteristics. And of course, it asserts with great confidence and aggressiveness that belief in God is irrational. It's a very simplistic, very familiar slogan. For Richard Dawkins, as we saw, faith in God counts as some kind of mental illness. But of course, it's just not that simple. The new atheism vigorously asserts the rationality of its own beliefs and the irrationality of everyone else's. But many other atheists find this deeply disturbing. It gives atheism a bad name, but above all, it's simply an unacceptably simplistic account of the place of reason in human thinking. As Julian Baggini, an atheist critic of Dawkins, rightly pointed out, the new atheism seems to believe that only, I quote, through stupidity or crass disregard for reason could anyone be anything other than an atheist. And Baggini suggested this kind of dogmatic intellectual arrogance just gives atheism a bad name. I think that helps understand why many ordinary atheists just find the new atheism an embarrassment. But there is a deeper question here, which is why should reason be able to tell us anything about God, or indeed anything about anything of significance, such as what is good, or what is right, or what is the meaning of life? In many ways, the key question here is the recognition of the limits of reason. Very often when I get in discussions with new atheists, they argue that reason is able to demonstrate everything. But the point I want to make here is that very often they offer a defense of the authority of reason, which is hopelessly circular. Reason proves that it's right. Reason is something that establishes its own authority. But it can't, and it doesn't. The key point is that defenses of the authority of reason are very often circular and parasitic. In using reason to prove the competency of reason, you are assuming the competency of reason. You're locked into a cycle which has no reference to the external world. This is one of the important themes I explore in my book, Why God Won't Go Away. If there is a flaw in human reasoning, then reason would not be able to detect this. We would simply be locked into unreliable patterns of thought without any means of escape. Now, of course, some tell us that reason liberates. I think wiser and more critical souls would say it has the capacity to enslave. Let's look at the work of the Austrian mathematician and philosopher Kurt Gödel, who gave a new rigor to these concerns in the early 20th century. Gödel painfully explored the whole problem of the limits of reason, and he pointed out that any belief system that's grounded in purely human reason is open to serious difficulties. What if reason malfunctioned? To examine this point a little bit more, let's look at Rebecca Goldenstein, a philosopher who clearly is sympathetic to the new atheism, but also knows a lot about Gödel. She writes like this: how can a person operating within a system of beliefs, including belief about beliefs, get outside that system to determine whether it's rational? If your entire system becomes infected with madness, including the very rules by which you reason, then how can you reason your way out of madness? So what if human reason is influenced by factors that we don't understand, and in fact that we can't control? It's not an idle question. In the last 2 centuries, the writings of Karl Marx, Charles Darwin, and Sigmund Freud have raised some deeply troubling questions for rationalism. How can we rely on reason if reason itself is biased or skewed or compromised? To give you an example, Karl Marx argued that human ideas were fundamentally shaped by cultural factors. Freud argued that we don't have access to our own true motivations. What if our actions or our ideas are shaped by dark forces within our subconsciousness, which we don't really understand and we can't actually overcome? And to make things even more complex, some schools of Darwinism suggest that our rationality is moulded by our evolutionary past. We're locked into some kind of primitive, instinctive responses to the world around us. Now, obviously, all of these issues are open to debate, but there is this dreadful thought: maybe reason imprisons us to a faintly understood past rather than liberating us. Now, one of the more puzzling features of the new atheism is its dogmatic affirmation of the rationalism of the Enlightenment. Again, if you look at the final chapter of Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, it's all about going back to the certainties of the Enlightenment. But we can't go back. We've moved on from the 18th century because things aren't as simple as it once was thought. Indeed, some would say that the new atheism is something of a museum piece here, in it's one of the few surviving pockets of 18th century Enlightenment rationalism in contemporary culture. But the point here is that recent philosophical critics of the Enlightenment, I'm thinking of leading philosophers like Alister McGrath or John Gray, have argued that the quest for a universal foundation and criterion of knowledge simply collapsed because of the accumulation of counter-evidence. It was a great vision, but it couldn't be sustained. And sadly, the writings of the new atheism just don't engage with this issue. They show not even the least inclination to consider why we've moved away from the Enlightenment. They talk about the resurgence of irrationalism and superstition, but the reality is rather different. We've come to realize the Enlightenment doesn't work. If it's to be true to the criteria by which it demands that others should be judged, then the new atheism needs to restrict itself to what can be proved by reason or science. And as we saw, that turns out not to be very much. Seeking to liberate us from what it so sillily terms superstition, the new atheism simply imprisons us within a rationalist straitjacket. In my book, Why God Won't Go Away, I explore this point about reason locking us into a self-imposed prison. It's a point made long before me by Isaiah Berlin, who pointed out that the reason why Western culture moved away from an excessive reliance on reason was simply this growing realization that reason imprisons us. It doesn't liberate us, it simply places bars around us, bars of its own making. To limit yourself to what reason can prove is merely to skim the surface of reality and to fail to discover the hidden depths beneath. We need to break free from this bondage to superficial readings of reality. Now, there's no way that making that point is irrational. It's simply a protest against those who have taken a good critical tool and made it into a view of reality. No wonder, I think, that so many people want to break free from dogmatic rationalism and discover a brighter and greater vision of reality, including the joy and wonder of God. Now, much the same could be said about the natural sciences, as we're going to see. They're great in themselves. The problems start when they get hijacked by anti-religious fundamentalists. And we're going to look at that in more detail in our next posting.